But that's not enough. If you come to me and say, well, the median amount of statistics experience the students have is 1 and the mean is 2, I might say, that's fantastic, that's really good to know, but if I'm preparing to teach this class, I need more than that. I also need to know how spread out the students' previous experiences are, because it's very different. It's very different to have a situation where almost all the students have either 1 previous statistics course or 2 previous statistics courses, then I know exactly how to teach, versus a situation where, on average, students have 1 or 2 courses, but there's many students who have 0 previous courses and lots of students with 6 and some students with 4, 5, 6, 7 different courses. That would be a very different course to prepare for if the students were much more spread out in terms of their experience. So I need to know not only the middle, but if I'm trying to summarize the pattern in my data, I also need to know the dispersion. How spread out are my values? I encourage you to pause for a moment and think about how you might describe to someone how spread out these values are. If someone said, it's great that you told me that the median is 1 and the mean is 2, but how should I prepare for this course? Are the students very different in terms of their background, or do they all have about 1 or 2 in terms of the previous experience? If you can think of a way to do that, your way is probably a great way to do it. I'm just going to mention a few ways that are conventional. So one thing we might do is just report the min and the max. That would be helpful. So if you tell me that the minimum value here is 0, and if you tell me that the maximum value is 6, that tells me a lot. That tells me a lot as I'm preparing for this class. I know that the middle is around 1 or 2, but there are some students with 0 and some students with 6, so the material I prepare for this course has to be appropriate for anyone within that range from 0 to 6. So that's very helpful. The min and the max can be great ways to explain the dispersion, how spread out the data is. Another common measure is called the range. The range is just the difference between the max and the min. So in this data set, there's a 6-course range in terms of the student's previous experience. That's also something useful to know. In my opinion, I'd rather know the min and the max themselves rather than just the range, because there's a big difference in preparing for a course where students range from 0 to 6 previous courses, and a situation where students range from 6 to 12 previous courses. So I'd rather know the min and the max, but the range is a common value. What else might we do? What else might we do? You can also report percentiles or quartiles. So for example, you might tell me that the second lowest value is a 0 and the second highest value is a 2. Or if we had 100 values, you might give me the cutoff such that 25% of values are less than this and 75% of values are greater than this. Okay, so that would be the, you could either give the 25th percentile, which I'll write this way. It's a percent sign with a little "ile" next to it. You could give me the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. The interquartile range is the difference between the 3rd quartile, also known as the 75th percentile, and the 1st quartile, also known as the 25th percentile. So I'll write IQR, which is a common abbreviation for interquartile range, and that's equal to the 75th percentile minus the 25th percentile. In a big data set, it's easy to calculate these two values, right? If I have thousands of values and I can find a cutoff such that 25% of the data is less than this, and I can find a cutoff such that 25% of the data is greater than that. It's a little awkward to find quartiles, to find a 25th percentile and a 75th percentile in a data set of only 4 values, and different softwares will attempt to do that in different ways. But the way to think about that here is perhaps I'm just going to report these inner numbers, 2 and 0, and say, well, the extreme values are 6 and 0, but more common values are 2 and 0, and I could give you the difference between those two, which would be 2. But I won't write that here because most software packages wouldn't necessarily give you exactly that number as the interquartile range. So this is another way to describe how spread out your data is. Any of these are fine. All of these are useful. There's another way to describe the dispersion in your data, and that is to see how far each data point is from the middle. And as we've said, there are multiple ways to describe the middle, so there are multiple ways to describe how far each point is from the middle. I encourage you to pause right now and see if you can come up with a way to do this. How could I summarize how far each point is from either the mean or the median?